You ever notice that the word cruise is almost the word curse?
No.
Yeah, me neither. Let's get into the dark underbelly of this ship that we call Mary.
Mary, your queen now. Mary,
why are you
why?
so scary? Time magazine calls it one of the 10 most haunted places on Earth.
Really?
And it's been on the National Ghost Registry since 1985. And you say this is unsubstantiated. I believe those are your words.
Also, the registry itself is a ghost because I couldn't find it anywhere.
There's no sources, so I guess it's something of a literary ghost. But that's all fitting for the ship whose final voyage began on Halloween 1967, and the story started right when it docked for good in Long Beach. That's when the ghost story started.
Okay.
Many guests and even some of the workers on the boat have had experiences, of course. Construction workers have insisted on working only in pairs.
Whoa,
They refused.
Buddy system?
It's some sort of insurance scam, I bet. But actors working the haunted mazes during Halloween have quit, saying that there are actual haunted things going on in the maze. Imagine
that would be. I would pay for that experience of like a worker who said he'd never go back. Be like, okay, I was working in the locker room.
Sure, I jumped out dressed like the nun from the nun movies, but there was a real nun in there. They say 50 of the rooms on the ship are haunted, with around 150 ghosts that are so far accounted for.
Ghost hotel.
Before we go into the more legendary, unsubstantiated stories, let's first cover the true stories of what has happened on the ship that I wouldn't let you talk. A word, Greg?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's my turn to talk about it. Okay, so don't be an idiot.
You read with the Kurka? Oh, no.
You pronounced it wrong. So the true stories would have happened on the ship that are probably even scarier if you're as afraid of the ocean as I am. Before this boat even set sail, death was hovering all around it. When the Depression hit in 1930, like you said, construction stopped for about 4 years. All of the workers were sent home until it started 4 years later. However, they apparently were not counting heads as people left the boat, because in April 1934, when construction crews got back on the ship, they found 2 of the old workers dead below deck.
Oh my God.
Right next to each other. They had been lying there dead for 4 years.
Necking because no women were allowed.
Yeah.
Been dead for 4 years and no one looked for them?
The families assumed they both just killed themselves. It was the Depression and they were construction workers in Glasgow or whatever.
That's true, yeah.
So when they found out, they assumed like they lost their jobs, they probably killed themselves. But we don't really know because a welding torch was found near them. So it might have been a gas buildup that got to them. We don't know what happened to these 2 people. Supposedly also during the construction, a welder accidentally got welded inside the double hole of the ship.
Edgar Allan Poe style?
Yeah. I want to show you this wine.
Yeah. I'm going to show you this wine. Come down here to the cellar with me.
And he was like Han Solo face on it. So he just died in there slowly. A man died. Yeah. They had a funeral for him at the spot on the ship he was sealed up in, but they left his body in there because it saved a lot of money for both the family and the boat. So if the story's true, there's a skeleton in the hole of that ship. That's 3 deaths already, and the boat hasn't even set sail yet. God. It made 1,001 transatlantic crossings. Yeah. There have been 49 recorded deaths that have taken place on board this ship.
Natural ones?
Not all natural. That count is broken down as 31 passengers, 16 crew members, 2 soldiers from its military days. On October 28th, 1936, the very first captain, Sir Edgar Britton, died of a stroke in his cabin on board of the ship.
Absolutely.
Most of whatever they do in Britain.
Tally-ho.
Yeah. Click your heels. Most of these deaths were from things like heart attacks, things like that. Yeah. They're listed on a plaque in the ship that don't make these natural deaths. They describe what happened. They're natural deaths. They don't sound very natural. Yeah. There were people like J.R. Maloney, P.A.W. Hughes, W. Humphreys, who were found dead in bunk. Ooh. That was their natural cause of death. Is that like
the heat stroke thing?
Some of them, yeah. Okay. Some of it was heat stroke. Well, Greg,
talk about
that.
Okay. Heat stroke's pretty creepy, Greg.
Anything that has to do with, bodies. And then there were people like H. Healy and A. Bow who died of coronary thrombosis, or G. Martin who died of carcinoma of stomach embolism, or F. Royal who died of pneumonia. But then there's some deaths that leave more story to be desired, like the chef L. Horsberg who died of a cerebral hemorrhage, and K. Thompson who died under anesthesia.
Whoa.
Then there's people like A.J. Lee and A.E. Boyland who fell overboard, and C. McCarthy who fell off gangway, and A.J.G. Golding who died of a skull fracture.
Oh boy.
Natural death. Natural. His skull broke. I don't know what happened.
Very natural that his body just stopped moving.
I mean, when you get pushed down the stairs that hard, it's natural.
When you hit him in the head after you're both drunk and he cheats at Jim Rummy, pretty natural what happens after that.
The way of the sea, as they call it. One story we do have is of Senior Second Officer William Eric Stark, who on September 18th, 1949, he was assigned the task of entertaining 2 new crew members. He told a steward to get him a bottle of gin to do so, and the steward went into the cabin of another officer to swipe some of his gin, grabbed a bottle, brought it to Stark. Stark poured a few glasses for himself and his guests, squeezed some lime into it, put it in a coconut, shake it all up, took a gulp, realized this doesn't taste right. What had happened was the officer whose bottle it was had finished the gin a while ago and used that bottle to store tetrachloride to use as cleaning fluid. So Stark immediately...
does that?
I don't know. Sailors, these crazy old sailors. Stark immediately realized what he had done. He joked it off. Okay, whatever. Let's get some more, whatever. Continued to entertain his guests. The next day, he was in the infirmary. He gagged and choked there for 4 days until he fell into a coma and died.
Oh, wow.
That's the infirmary for you. People say they can still hear choking noises coming from that part of the ship. Another documented story happened July 10th, 1966, during a routine fire drill to a sailor named John Petter, or as some now call him, Half-Hatch Harry. Doesn't make sense because his name's not Harry, but half certainly makes sense. So the watertight doors, you've seen Titanic.
Yeah.
In case of a crash, seal up, water can't get through. But they had to be tested often. But during these drills, it took about 60 seconds for the door to fully shut. So the younger kids working on the ship, they made a game. How many times can you run back and forth through the door before it's sealed shut? And Petter got a little greedy in trying to make it through. And just as it was closing, got stuck. He was crushed to death underneath this door below deck. This is a true story that happened.
Sounds really familiar. I think they tell the story on the ship.
They do. They're kind of proud of this story. Wow. People nearby this door now often say they can feel something tugging at their stuff, and have also seen greasy handprints along the floor of Petter desperately trying to crawl through in time. Sometimes there have even been sightings of a full-bodied man in blue overalls and a beard walking towards this door and then disappearing. There was also a guy, also below deck, John Henry, who was found dead just outside the boiler room. Some people think this might have been one of the guys that was found after the Depression, so it might be the same story. There's also a theory he was an engineer, though, who was burned to death by a burst steam pipe down there. Regardless, he's still seen wandering around the downstairs area, and he apparently has an affinity for harassing women, so he must have been working on the ship. He likes to brush women's cheeks and pinch their butts.
What?
Yeah, I mean, I said butts. Let me take my ring off and repent. He used to be seen in the green room for performers of the old boiler room stage. The way he was seen, there was a square hole in the ceiling, and people would see glowing eyes coming out of it. Sometimes they would see his entire face, and he'd just be like watching women.
What is it, Chuck Berry?
I swear he's a ghost, yeah.
So it's not me. What a weird Scooby-Doo scheme that is.
I'm a ghost who likes women a lot. There were a lot of dark moments on board the ship during World War II.
Yeah.
This is why I would not let you talk about.
I'm dying to talk about it.
Whoa! There were, of course, I was haunted to talk about it. Soldiers who jumped ship just as they were pulling out of New York to go fight in Europe, who I guess had second thoughts.
Here's a second thought. I don't want to be alive anymore.
I'd rather die here than there. There was the time they passed through the Red Sea and other parts closer to the equator. Like you said, it was insulated for the cold North Atlantic. Now they were in 120-degree weather, and several of the soldiers crowded below deck died of heat exhaustion, frozen or overboard, sir. Then there were the German and Italian prisoners of war that the boat was carrying. Several of them died on the boat back to America. But these tragedies weren't exclusive just to people on the ship. The ship itself has seen very bad moments. The Queen Mary was, like you said, it had a bounty by Hitler. IG-88 was looking for it. So Nazis were hunting it. Like everyone wanted to get this boat. In December 1942, the ship was carrying 16,800 military personnel, which was and still is the most amount of people ever transported by a man-made vessel, ever. And what a momentous occasion for the boat to be 700 miles off the coast of Scotland, only to encounter not a Nazi U-boat, but an unexpected 91-foot-tall Nazi wave of water that hit them so hard.
My God.
If they had rocked another 5 inches, they would have capsized. The biggest ship with the most amount of passenger, it would have flipped over.
My God.
All of those lives were saved, but an even greater tragedy hit when they decided to make a movie based on this years later. The Poseidon Adventure is based on what almost happened to the Queen Mary. But one crisis that cannot be averted happened October 2nd, Melissa's birthday, 1942, the year she was born. The Grey Ghost.
It's about to make some ghosts.
She was carrying 15,000 troops from New York to Glasgow. And like you said, since the Queen Mary was such a wanted ship, she was escorted by a much smaller ship called the HMS Curaçao. That met them about 200 miles off the coast to escort them to Greenock, Scotland, safely. To confuse any U-boats that might be tracking them, the two ships were zigzagging, like you said, back and forth, the Curaçao in front, Queen Mary behind to throw off their trail. This was going well until they were about 20 miles off the coast, and their zigzagging got out of sync with each other. The Queen Mary started catching up too fast to the Curaçao because it was the fastest boat ever made. By the time people realized what was happening, it was too late to change course. And at 2:15 p.m., the Queen Mary sliced through the HMS Curaçao like a piece of butter, it was described, just right through it.
Yeah.
It cut the Curaçao directly in half. The boiler exploded. Their crew was thrown into the water if they were lucky. A lot of them just died.
Yeah.
The rest went into the water. The problem was Captain of the Queen Mary at the time, Cyril Illingworth, was ordered not to stop for any reason until the soldiers he was transporting were safe in Scotland. There were too many enemies. If they had stopped, they probably would have been attacked by a U-boat. It would jeopardize everybody else's life on board. So he had to decide the Queen Mary is not going to help. They kept sailing with the Curaçao and its crew. It sank to the bottom of the ocean. It took 4 minutes for that boat to sink. And the Queen Mary itself, they tore a hole in its hull.
Really?
They were taking on water as well. So as soon as they got in range of calling for help, they did. But of the 439 crew members of the Curaçao, 338 of them drowned. It's horrible. One guy, he got covered in oil when the boiler blew up, so he was completely black.
Yeah.
He was floating in the water for 18 hours.
Alive?
Alive. And the only reason he was alive is because he was covered in oil, and that's why he didn't get hypothermia.
Wow.
What a lucky guy.
What a lucky guy to get covered in boiling hot oil.
The accident was kept a secret during the war to keep morale up and to preserve the mystique.
To keep morale up?
The mystique of the Grey Ghost. Like, they didn't want any blemish on the record, but it did go to trial because both sides blame the Curaçao blames Queen Mary, Grey Ghost, Grey Ghost blames Curaçao. The ruling was that the Curaçao had been going 3 knots slower than it was supposed to and was thus responsible, but this ruling was challenged and brought back to court where it was eventually decided in the most King Solomon way. The Curaçao was 2/3 responsible, Queen Mary was 1/3 responsible, and everyone went home a little less guilty. But that blood was still on the Queen Mary's propellers, and the residue of the residue of that can still be felt when people sometimes hear pounding on the hull of sailors begging to be let on, and the sound of rushing water from the spot where the collision happened. The most recent confirmed death associated with the boat happened in December 2011. A 26-year-old woman, she apparently got into a drunken argument with her boyfriend in one of the bars on board. She was heard saying, "I don't want to live. I don't want to be with you anymore." She ran on deck and tried to climb over the railing. She fell 75 feet into the freezing ocean and died. That's the most recent death. So if you're counting for those 49 officially recorded deaths, plus this one from 2011, and the Curaçao disaster, you're looking at 388 people's blood on the hands of this boat.
That's great. Didn't someone drown in the pool too?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
But that's just the straight history. The legends are pretty scary as well. Some of them not so scary. One legend actually involves the same door below deck, that crust Petter, which coincidentally or not is door number 13. Second story of this door comes from 1942 about an 18-year-old sailor named John Mckenzie.
This is the door that cut the person in half?
Well, it just crushed him.
Oh, right, but the legend is that he got cut in half.
Here's the guy who got cut in half. Spoiler alert. Apparently, Mckenzie was not well liked by his comrades in arms, so they decided to take his arms, stretched him, and his feet, stretched him across door 13, pressed the button, and slowly let it crush him in half.
That did not happen.
These are the legends.
Wow.
It's just a tale not confirmed, but people do hear screams around this door as well, which are also not confirmed, but could also just be from the guy who actually did get crushed to death by this door.
Which ghost is this?
What happened to you? Were you liked by your friends? There's also the woman in white, who is frequently seen dancing alone in the shadows in the corner of the Queen's salon. There's also a woman in red who was seen for a full 10 minutes before she disappeared. There's a guy who's seen dressed perfectly for a ball from the 30s who sits and watches people in the Veranda Grill banquet room. There's a guy that's been seen in the lobby wearing a yellow zoot suit and yellow fedora and yellow teeth.
And he keeps calling for Caldonia.
There's a man in a top hat and tails that likes to go up behind people at the bar and clear his throat and then disappear.
Wow. If I was a ghost, I'd be that one.
Yeah.
Excuse me, madam.
pinch. There's a little 5-year-old boy named Daniel, dressed in blue, who just got married, who's seen wandering around. There's another little boy named Jeremy. People claim to smell the cigar smoke of the last captain of the ship, whose name was Treasure Jones, coming from his old captain's quarters. Cigar smoke also comes from the old Churchill suite, complete with people here pacing and mumbling coming from in there. My favorite legend, though, is about a chef. The legend goes that this chef was horrible to his staff, and even worse, he made terrible food. So one day, his staff couldn't take it anymore and revolted against him and took it so far that they pushed him into the kitchen's walk-in oven and roasted him alive.
Oh my God.
To death. People can still hear him screaming as he's burned alive, and that walk-in oven is still being used today. Yeah, that's a good legend. People have heard music and parties coming from rooms that turned out to be empty. The door to the engine room is felt hot, even though the engine hasn't been used since the 60s. People hear a baby crying in the old third-class children's playroom, where supposedly a baby once died shortly after being born. Voices have been heard in the old isolation ward. Ghost crew members have been seen on the bridge. There's temperature changes, knocking, slamming, screaming, crying, lights flickering, just like home for me. One of the biggest hot spots on board is the first-class pool. This is what you're thinking about.
Okay.
People have seen a lot of ghostly folk wandering around down here in 30s clothing and swimsuits. Some here splashing. Some have seen wet footprints, which Melissa said they did with special effects on the ghost tour, but they don't do that anymore, so I think she is Haley Joel Osment. There's an entire cast of specific ghosts that are known for hanging around this pool. The first is named Jackie, who might have been Jacqueline Torin, who in real life supposedly drowned in that pool when she was 5 or 6 years old, but she's a nice ghost. She's a nice ghost.
Let her in.
She is sometimes seen playing peekaboo from the upstairs balcony in the pool room. Not cute. And she'll answer questions if you ask her.
Wow, okay.
She's also heard giggling, and people have felt a small hand pulling them away if they got too close to the edge of the pool. So she's trying to, don't end up like me. However, she has a friend who is not so nice. It's a girl named Sarah who died separately in this room in 1949, and she is mean. She's older, so she's taken it upon herself, apparently, to protect Jackie from people who are trying to bug her too much. Yeah. Jackie and Sarah often heard singing together, along with another friend of theirs named Jeremy, who might have been that little boy. Sometimes the lady in white, though, from upstairs is seen coming down to the pool to sing to Jackie as well. We don't know exactly what happened to Sarah, but there's a girl who's rumored to have been murdered and maybe a little bit more in the room under the stairs by the pool.
Okay.
And it's sometimes still heard crying in there. People believe this to be Sarah. This links up with another ghost who supposedly has this strong evil presence over that same room. He goes by the name Grumpy. He's heard growling at people, and he's believed to have killed a girl on board on accident and hid her in that room. And when that body was found, he then killed himself on board as well. This is believed to be the murder of Sarah, and some believe he may have been responsible for Jackie's death as well.
He's a confirmed Seven Dwarf, right?
Oh, yeah. Might have been Sleepy, though. I think he tried to blame it on Dopey. There are stories
He'll say yes to any. He'll confess to anything.
There are stories of other little kids haunting this pool who died of all sorts of kid-like deaths. A little boy fell overboard nearby the pool into the ocean. Another little girl named Mary drowned in 1952. One girl was sliding down the banister of the staircase when a wave hit the boat, made her fall off, broke her neck on the ground.
Right.
There's also a shy little girl down there named Carrie, who nobody knows anything about because she's shy. There's an adult couple who haunts the pool named David and Sarah. There's a lot of name crossover, who wander around trying to find their lost kids who may or may not have been some of these other dead ones we've got here. What, is this your dead kid? They've also...
No, I don't want that dead orphan ghost. I want the other one.
I want
my
the
dead
sweet
orphan
one.
ghost.
I want that shy one. These two, David and Sarah, are also seen in Sir Winston's restaurant and will answer questions if you address them by name.
Okay.
There's also another couple of men who wander around the pool named Jack and Terrence, who pull on people's clothes and are usually accompanied by an intense heat, which makes people think they might have been some of the soldiers who died of heat stroke. The other big hot spots on the boat are a couple of staterooms. Okay. So the first one is room B474. A family of a mom, a dad, and their 3 daughters were staying here in 1959 in that room, when for whatever reason the dad decided this vacation's over. Inside the room, he took a piece of rope and strangled his wife and 2 of his daughters to death. He then dragged his remaining daughter Dana into the bathroom and shot her and then himself. Dana's now seen around the archives in the cargo and former second-class pool area calling out for her mom. But the star haunted room on board is room B340. It's considered the most haunted room on the ship. There's several stories attached to this particular room because in the days before it was just a floating hotel, this was actually 3 different rooms. So one story is that of a man named Walter J. Adamson who died of unknown causes suddenly one day in that room. Another is that of a pregnant war bride from Europe who was being brought to America in that room but died in childbirth inside here. Another says that the man who handled all the money on the boat was murdered here and that another man killed his 5-year-old daughter in that room. One story from the 60s says that a man named Samuel the Savage killed 2 women in that room and then was locked in one of the nearby rooms with a guard at the door until they got to shore. But one night Samuel started pounding on the door begging him to be let out because he said, "Someone's in here trying to kill me." The guard did nothing. The next day the ship arrived in New York. Cops came on board to arrest him, opened the room. When they went inside, they found Samuel ripped to pieces with his intestines thrown everywhere. Nobody knows what happened. He was also dead.
He didn't survive that one. Close call.
You almost got him. Visitors have had weird experiences in that room going back as early as its final voyage in 1967 and were even recorded in the ship's log. Like weird things are going on in this room. There's been knocking on doors in the middle of the night, phone calls with nobody on the other end. People have heard a voice yelling, "Get out." Lights go on and off, doors slam. Some have had their covers ripped off in the middle of the night and see a dark figure standing at the foot of their bed. There were so many incidents in that room that it was eventually closed for 30 years to the public. The people who believe these stories claim that Kennard hushed all this stuff up for obvious reasons, but those who don't believe claim that none of this ever happened, but that the stories were started by Disney employees when the ship was owned by them. They say that the real reason the room was closed for 30 years was because it was never a sleeping room before the 90s or so, and they just didn't have enough people staying on the boat hotel like they thought. So for fun and to try to drum up more visitors, they took this random empty room and were like, this happened in here. This happened in this room. It's now definitely open to stay for the night. And if you're able to convince yourself that those are all just lies told by the Disney Corporation, they give you a Ouija board, tarot cards, and a crystal ball during your stay. Nowadays, the Queen Mary embraces all these stories 100%. They have their Ghosts and Legends tour, Dining with the Spirits experience, and for the past 10 years, the Dark Harbor mazes during Halloween, which they usually try to keep at least loosely based on some of these real legends on board. But as with many places that pride themselves on being haunted, how much of all this is real ghost stuff and how much was just made up by Disney? There's evidence that once Disney saw that people weren't coming to stay on a docked boat hotel like they had hoped, they did try spinning it. People think they kind of wanted to turn the whole thing into basically a floating haunted mansion that you could sleep in. Like that was going to be...
You could have called it that and I would have gone.
They might have even had plans for like full animatronics to be like, this is a whole experience. But at the same time, some really bad stuff did happen on this boat. Sure. So it's hard to see the line where horror ends and grim grinning ghosts begins. But what impressed me most about the haunting of the Queen Mary is how interconnected all the ghosts on board seem to be. Like the 2 girls, they're friends by the pool. The lady upstairs sings to them, calm them down. The engineer might have been the worker who killed himself. These relationships, they're like growing and evolving. And there's almost like a fan fiction community out there looking for connections between this ghost might know this ghost did this, that are all living on in the Queen Mary really expanded universe of ghouls. And in the end, isn't that the most Disney thing of all?
A large complex full of ghouls who are doing their own business, and you're just like you're living on a little buggy going through it.